So today we are so lucky to have Andrea Nguyen of the Pho Cookbook. Please join me in welcoming her to Google. And with that, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much. We've got a few extra seats around if anybody wants to sit down and maybe get like a better view of what I'm going to be working on.
And feel free to move stools. Make yourself at home.
This is your kitchen space today, and like with a lot of classes in teaching, I'm a professional cookbook author and cooking teacher and consultant. And so a lot of what I do is help people become better home cooks because I am a professional home cook. I'm not a restaurant chef, so I'm always thinking of like, how can I help home cooks figure out ways to make foods that they may or may not be familiar with and really up their game. So the Pho Cookbook is my 5th cookbook, and I'm Vietnamese by heritage. I was born in Vietnam. And when my family fled Vietnam in 1975, we brought a lot of our food memories with us because for a family of 7, we only had like 2 little suitcases. So imagine carrying like 2 backpacks worth of your belongings and going to another country to start over. And so what did we have but the flavors that my parents wanted to recreate? And there were people in their 40s with 5 kids. And so, we weren't living near a pho shop. We couldn't walk out and get pho like we used to. So they ended up making a lot of the food at home. And initially, we had to cook a lot from an American supermarket, which back in 1979, and some of you may be old enough to remember, it was really sad. Soy sauce, bad rice, yucky vegetables. A lot of that has changed. And with the Pho Cookbook, because a lot of people sense that it's like, oh, I can't make pho. I've had people tell me that it takes hours. I've even had Vietnamese people tell me that their parents tell them, oh my God, it takes like, an overnight simmer. And pho shop owners will say, I brewed this pho for 18 hours. Well, when you're making pho at home for as few as 2 people or up to 8 people, you can really, really spend a lot less time because you're a small batch in it. You're making artisanal pho at home. So you don't have to spend that much time. So when you work your way through the book, you'll notice that at the front part, there's this thing called a pho manual. And it explains like 99% of what I know about making pho. And the extra 1% is very boring and distraction, so I left that out. For example, like one man told me he had to scrape the bones off until his knuckles bled or something. And I was like, I'm not putting that in the book. So I was just like, he said it's a waste of time. And I thought, well, yeah, I think so. And then after the pho manual, there's a chapter called Master Pho. And what it offers are different ways to make pho. So you can spend as little as 40 minutes doctoring up canned broth. So if you could do me a favor and hand me that can of broth, this is audience participation time. And I'm not doing any product placement, but stuff like this, Swanson's chicken broth. Or if you're shopping at Whole Foods, then by all means, the Whole Foods 365 broth is really good. You want sort of a higher sodium broth. And so there are 3 different recipes, or 40 minutes with grocery stores ingredients like this, and then with like Annie Chun noodles, if you're shopping at a regular market, it's very good. You can have pho, chicken, vegetable, or beef. There's another method of making pho using a pressure cooker. How many of you own pressure cookers? The Instant Pot, how many are you Instant Potters? So you can spend like an hour and a half. If you're using an Instant Pot, please reduce the amount of water by 1 cup. Okay, just saying that because the Instant Pot has this maximum fill line, as you know, and you can go up to that point, and it also retains pressure for a very, very long time. So you can kind of save yourself a little time, and it's not venting. So you should get the same quantity with 1 cup less water. Just saying. if you're using something like a pressure cooker to make pho, you can do it in an hour and a half from beginning to end. And you can also then freeze your broth. And there are instructions on how to do that so that you could have what I call the pho bank at your disposal. My mother now lives off my frozen pho bank. She's 82. She gets to rest. But anyway, and then the last method of making pho is with an old school simmer. That's where it's a weekend project, okay? Pressure cooker pho, that's a weeknight project, You can make weekend pho on a weeknight. Doctoring up quick pho from, and from using canned broth. That could be like a lunchtime thing or a weeknight thing. But when you have time, brew from scratch. And what we're going to have serving you here today is a vegan beef version of pho. But I also wanted to talk about making classic beef pho, old school, using a stock pot. So we're talking then like 4 or 5 hours worth of time. But most of it's passive. You can text, you can work, you can take your dog on a walk, whatever. And one of the first things that you want to start doing when you're making pho, and regardless of different kinds, and what I'm going to talk about applies to pho across the board, okay? The aromatics. Basically, we're talking onion and ginger. Get yourself some plump ginger. And in my recipes, I'll say chubby, like the size of your big toe, chubby. And I think we all get a sense of what that means. If you're using a scale, and a scale unfortunately never lies, 1 inch of ginger is approximately 1 ounce. So you'll find sometimes like, whoa, that ginger looks like it's really chubby, but it's really, because it's got like, maybe it's just really dense or too watery, but you really like get up to that at 1 ounce for that gingery quality. And then you want to get that going. Traditionally, we would put that on a brazier. You can use onion, you can yellow onion, or you can also use a shallot. So in Vietnam, you and I would be squatting next to a charcoal brazier because we don't have indoor grills. We don't have ovens that we could use a broiler element. We don't have gas stoves, a lot of us, but we do have grills that, you can use an indoor grill. At home, I use I have a gas range, so I'm just going to put it directly on the grill. So this business about charring the aromatics, what is it? I think it is the only aspect of pho that the Vietnamese really borrowed from the French in terms of culinary technique. There's a lot of discussion about, pho comes from France because it sounds like a French word, pho, like pot-au-feu, like fire. Well, the French were in Vietnam when pho developed, which was in the early part of the 20th century. So we're talking late, 1800s, early 1900s, in the northern part of Vietnam. So Vietnam's this very long country. Hanoi's up here, and this is where all the pho action was happening. And the French were around, and they liked their beef. So they were slaughtering a lot of cows. And they left the scraps. Things like bones. Okay, so these are leg bones. I'm going to that's coming from here, okay? And sometimes they're called femur bones, so marrow bones. So I'm just going to pass these around so that you get a sense. A lot of times, like with cookbooks, they don't explain what things look like to you, and they're like, just go out and get a femur bone. And you're like, what does that look like? That is a marrow bone or a femur bone. They also, and if it happens to include the socket, that's called a knuckle bone. So just, remember our biology classes, or in our skeletons and stuff. And I'm going to talk while I'm doing some of this stuff. The other thing is sometimes there are neck bones. So someone can pass that along there. I have a certain range, you guys, that I get to move into. But yes, please. Google makes pho and cooks other things with these amazing, amazing bones. So you're not, as a home cook, you are not going to be accessing bones like this. And please, cutting them is not something you want to try at home. It requires a saw, like a butcher saw, like a bandsaw. And at markets, like Asian markets, you'll see that they're running them through the saws like this. And so, but this is like an entire like cervical spine of the cow. And so you can blend bones, marrow bones, knuckle bones, neck bones. Neck bones contribute meaty flavor. Marrow bones contribute fat. Knuckle bones contribute sort of like some tendon. For all of you who like tendon, you can just scrape the tendon off the knuckle bones. Who needs to go buy like tendon? That's what a pho shop does. You're not opening a pho shop. If you were, you wouldn't be working at Google. So.
Oh no, some entrepreneurial Googlers out there. It's not a conflict of interest.
No. Well, but you've got pho shops going on here on the campus. So the other thing, there are a lot of impurities in these bones that you're dealing with. So oftentimes when I'm making pho at home, I've got my aromatics going on one burner, and at the same time, I do this thing where I parboil the bones. So what happens is I blanch. It's parboiling means you're putting something in water, and then you're bringing it up to a boil, and then you're going to turn off the heat. What does that do? That is called scum. It is not going to do anything to contribute to your broth, but to dirty it up. No bueno. We do not. Think of this like the scuzzy stuff that you see in the ocean, and you're like, I do not want to wade into that. This is not what you want in your broth. And when you do this, I have to operate an induction burner while I'm talking.
It's a trick, that whole thing. I can never get it to work. It's not just you.
So typically, like, I'll bring this to a boil, let it go for a little bit, and then I will take it over to the sink and then just dump it out. And what this allows me to do is very, very easily remove any kind of scuzziness that would otherwise really cloud up my broth. And you would be using a lot more bones than what I have here, but I wanted you to see that once that you do this, you brew your broth, and number one, the flavor's not going to be off because of the bones. Here, you can pass it around if you guys can see what blanched bones looks like. But it's a lot cleaner. And same thing with chicken. Just parboil them, dump it out, spray it down. This is what that sprayer is really good for in your sink. They don't tell you that when you buy your house or buy a new kitchen faucet sink, but that's what you're doing. And yes? 2 to 3 minutes. Yeah, I did it less because these bones, there were just like 2 of them, and I had them sitting around. But parboiling, then once that you strain the broth, man, it is really lovely and clear. So with the aromatic, so you're gonna let them go until they start blackening, and you're through with the blackening when you're looking about like this. It's a little CSI looking, right? I mean, but you're looking to char the outside. You're not looking to cook the entire thing because you want some of that rawness. All this charring does is convert some of the kind of harsher qualities of the onion and the ginger or the shallot to a sweet level. And that imparts this beautiful sweetness to the broth. So take your time to do that when you're doing old school. If you're pressure cooking it, what I found, my friends, is that it does not matter. Skip the charring. Because the pressure cooker, it's like the Beavis and Butthead of appliances because it's literally cooking under pressure. It's got this gasket that goes on really, really tight on the top, and it's like this. There is nowhere for that steam to escape. Whereas in a regular pot, we can go ahead and let the steam escape. Whether the lid's on or not, there is steam escaping. But in a pressure cooker, that steam's going nowhere. So it moves really fast and it moves really hot. So it's expressing flavors a lot more rapidly and with more force. As a result, it wipes out all the nuances that you would get in doing this. So there's a technique that I have in preparing the pressure cooker pho where you get to skip this, just so that you know, so that you don't always have to do the same methods. There are different workarounds. And so once that you get the aromatics to this level, what you're going to do is you're going to peel it. And you can use, I oftentimes give it a little rinse under water to soften the skin. I'm just going to turn that off. And then you can use a peeler or you can use a knife. But you want to get all of that brownness off. And let's see if I can use one of these guys. Yeah, look at that. You want to get that stuff off of there. And if you're standing over your sink, it's really smart to do this while you're over your sink. Then you can just let the stuff drop right in there. But you want to get all of the charred bits off because that will impart color. Is that what you were saying?
It smells good.
Oh, it smells good. You're like, it smells really good and I'm hungry. I wish she would just hasten up. Pho is all about patience, my dear. No, it is. And, you know, I'm going to tell you, I've been making and eating pho. Well, I've been eating pho since I was 5.5. But I've been making pho probably for about 12 years since I started writing my first book. And I was like, you know, if I'm going to be a respectable cook, Vietnamese cook, I need to learn how to make pho. And then I realized that it just took practice and a lot of eating. And there's also travel too. So because, you know, everywhere I go, I try to find a pho shop to stop by. And there's a lot of stories about pho that are really cool. So, you know, like I talked to this guy who talked about his scraping the bones, and he was a man in Hanoi who was like a former cop, and he's like, I think I want to open a pho shop. And so he went and he apprenticed for like, you know, months with this master pho vendor. And then at the end of the line, he's like, it's really a lot of work. I don't think I want to do this. But he learned the thing about like the bone scraping business. Anyway, so you get your onion to this level, and then what you want to do is, you know, cut it into chunks, and then you want to just give it a smack. If you have a meat mallet, otherwise known as a meat tenderizer, that thing that's, you know, like a hammer for the kitchen, use that on this. It's okay. It's one of, you know, because otherwise sometimes when I use a knife, it kind of goes flying. And what I'm going to do is like that, is I'm going to pass this around so that you guys can smell it. Here you go. So there's a certain sweetness, sweet spiciness, and that's what imparts flavor to pho. Now let's talk about the spices, and you would do the same thing with the onion. And if you're working with shallot, then by all means, they're smaller. This is what I would call a small shallot. In Vietnam, the shallots are about this small. They're tiny, and they look like red boiling onions. In America, where everything's bigger, buy bigger shallots. In fact, in the recipes, you'll see me say, buy huge ones, because then it'll take less time. And it imparts a flavor that's a little bit stronger than onion is. Onion's a little bit sweeter. And so, but you know, Vietnamese cooks, when, like my mother, came to America and found that their beloved shallot now costs a lot more. This is like the typical onion in Vietnam. Yellow onions are very expensive. But over here in the States, yellow onion is affordable and shallot is expensive, so people did a switcheroo. this is a little sweeter, this is a little bit more pungent. So the flavors of American pho, what we're all pretty much more used to, is really based upon this like hyphenated experience. And so the pho story is one that we can plug into, and at many, many different levels is what I'm saying. And just because you're Vietnamese does not mean that you need to know how to make pho or that you're going to make it well. All it takes is practice and a lot of, just figuring out, like teasing out what goes into pho. So first we've got the aromatics. Then we've got like you've got your beef bones there. Or if you're making a vegetarian one, you've got vegetables. And in this beautiful bowl are all of the vegetables that we used for the vegan pho broth that you'll be tasting. There's also a beef pho one that you'll be tasting. But the only thing that may actually be interesting to you is what the hell is an apple doing in here? The apple is in the broth, and you'll see in the recipes, because I needed a little natural sweetness. So Vietnamese food, like a lot of Asian food, is a balance of savory, sweet. So naturally, hey, I'm going to use a little MSG, right? Sort of like mother's little helper. But a lot of us don't want to use MSG, or maybe, it's not like a regular American, kitchen item. But you need that little sweetness. And so traditionally, you would get that from using this stuff, which is Chinese yellow rock sugar. And it's available at Asian markets. And they look like a gemstone that you could maybe like make a ring out of for your partner. But or sometimes they're like these big chunks. But this is the packaging that it comes in. And get the yellow stuff, not the white stuff, because the yellow stuff, it has a little better, rounder flavor. It's a semi-refined sugar, if you're interested in like glycemic issues. But do you need that? Not necessarily. If you use a Fuji apple, then you get that natural sweetness built in. And you don't really need to go and get that sugar. The sugar is very easy to use, just like MSG is very easy to use for that little bit of burst. And there are different levels of sweetness. But I found that, when you're not near an Asian market or you don't want to go, the little apple is quite nice. Make sure you peel it before you use it, because there are waxes and stuff in there. So you've got your main featured ingredients. Let's talk about the spices. So typically, people are like, oh, pho is all about star anise. No, that is not the only spice in pho. It's a blend. It's a dance of spice notes, and the spices should never, ever hit you on the head. What happens is a lot of pho cooks, professional and home cooks, they will add the spices toward the end of the brewing time. And sometimes they kind of go overboard, and it's like, boom, way too much spice, and you're not getting the subtleties of pho, which is the beefiness, or the vegetables, or the chicken, or even sometimes seafood. So at home, you can put those spices right into your broth as you're making it, and they will then kind of, get subsumed into the layers of flavors that you're building. And so what have we got? Yes, we've got our star anise friends right here. We've also got coriander seed. In my chicken pho broth, when I'm starting from raw chicken, I use coriander seed, a few cloves, and also cilantro. Chicken, for obvious reasons, is a different animal than a cow. And the flesh is lighter. So it really cannot take star anise unless the chicken's been, like you'll see in the rotisserie chicken pho recipe, I use star anise and cinnamon, because that's where you can really take it. Because a roast chicken or a roast turkey has a strong flavor, whereas when you're using raw chicken, it's much more delicate, and you should treat your proteins appropriately. And that thing about chicken not being a cow, that came from my mother. Because one day I was like, Mom, everybody's making their chicken pho with star anise and cinnamon. She looked at me, she goes, they're different animals. It is so true, and she's in her 80s. gets to say what she wants to say. So we've got coriander seed, star anise, and when you use star anise, everybody, like, make sure you count the number of pods, like I say, like big, whole, nice, lovely pods. And if they're broken, it's okay, but if they've got little ones, then that doesn't really count as a pod. So, count them up. Because you don't always get whole star anise, whole cloves. And I know that it's like, this is called, in Vietnamese we call this din hương, which means fragrant nail. It looks like a nail. It's very strong, so I just add just a few of them and use the whole ones. Get nice plump ones. Sometimes you'll find, these are all spices that you can find at a regular market, in a bulk food spice section, for example, at a health food store, so that you don't have to commit to buying entire packages of them. There's also cinnamon sticks. So these are just regular cinnamon sticks, and oftentimes the cinnamon that we're buying in our regular supermarkets is coming from Vietnam. Bonus, who would have known? So pass those along, and cinnamon comes in different sizes. Sometimes they're slender, sometimes they're medium, sometimes they're husky. And the amount that you use will vary on how much pho you're making. So you'll see that in the recipe, slender, medium, or husky. And there's a weight amount in the pho manual that you'll see. Also fennel. Fennel is very sweet and aromatic, so that contributes to pho sometimes too. The last thing I want to talk about is an unusual pho spice that you don't see that often in the United States, and it's this stuff. This is Chinese black cardamom. And it looks like a nutmeg, for those of you who are familiar with whole spices. And you buy it whole at Chinese markets. Indian cooking also relies upon Chinese black cardamom, and theirs are smaller. So if you're shopping at an Indian market and you're buying Indian cardamom, use like a weight amount for your broth, so that you're spot on, because otherwise they are a lot smaller than you think. And of course, I got it to work, Dee Dee. The other thing, so I'm just going to, with the spices, they come in different sizes, and you're gonna see there's small, medium, and large. So what does it look like inside? There are these little pyramid-shaped pods. It's very mentholy. I've shown a lot of chefs and even bartenders black cardamom, and some bartenders I'm gonna shave it into my cocktail. Which then gave me this other idea, which is to make a pho spice blend. So for you to get an association of what all the spices are like together, so I've brought a couple of samples. One, in the smaller one, it's made with star anise, and in the taller one, it says Pho cardamom. So this one has a little star anise and some black cardamom, and so they're different. So in the book, I use this in dishes where I want to turn something a little pho-ish. So fried rice, I want that hit. Boom, goes into the fried rice as I'm cooking. How do I make a pho dumpling? Put a little pho spice in there to give it that lift. And then there's even, I make a from-scratch hoisin sauce. So hoisin sauce typically uses, Chinese five spice. So, and the hoisin sauce that is served oftentimes at pho shops is really, sweet and kind of yucky, in my opinion. I'm just saying, you may love it. But it can have a much more sophisticated complexity if you make it yourself out of miso. So I'm going to throw some of that pho spice in there. I also use it in a cocktail, a pho michelada beer cocktail. I rim the glass with salt, kosher salt, you're like, I want one now. And so there's like, you can use, this is a great thing and to have around. And you can keep it in your cupboard for a while. If you like it, you can like double it, triple it, whatever you like. And it's just a really nice little thing to play around with. You can mix it with kosher salt and create your own rub for like pork. I also use it to make meatballs, those snappy little meatballs. You can make those meatballs out of grocery store ingredients and a food processor. And it's no longer mystery meat. It's really something that you prepared. And so, there's a lot going on with pho that we don't know about. So, foundation stuff. Let's talk about how to put a bowl of pho together. The other thing that I want to discuss before that is, so your broth is done. You want to strain it. So I am all into straining through muslin. It is much more ecological than using paper towel or cheesecloth, which oftentimes you cannot recycle. This little guy, I have used it for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. I have different ones, you buy the fabric at a fabric store. It's unbleached muslin. And I go home and I tear it into pieces around 18 by 18 square. And I launder it regular, in the washing machine. And the edges fray really beautifully. It traps all the impurities and just enough fat so that you still have some fat in the broth, because that's what fat is flavor. Oftentimes, pho broth is totally devoid of fat and it's kind of thin, but you need the fat for roundness. And so the muslin does that. Right afterwards, you can launder it with regular dish soap, hang it out to dry, or throw it into the wash, and you're good. I use that to make soy milk, because I make my own soy milk sometimes to make fresh tofu. If I've got to wring out water from tofu when I'm crushing it, goes in there. Vegetables, sometimes if you're pickling something or you're making an Asian salad with cucumber, stuff that has a lot of water, wring it out that way. Don't use your hands. I mean, that's it's almost kind of just let the muslin kind of do its thing. And you can reuse it. My problem with cheesecloth is that it oftentimes bulks and expands and rips. And then, you can't reuse it so well. So strain through muslin with ingredients like bones and stuff. You can go ahead and you can bulk up your bones by saving bones from other food cooking projects, And so you don't always have to, you can amend your collection. And one last thing about the beef pho. People often ask, what is the best cut for beef pho in terms of the cooked beef? Go brisket. And that's a beautiful chunk right there. And I'm going to ask you to do a little extra heavy lifting for me and hand me the brisket. So this is what you would see at a butcher shop. And I like to get the brisket from the fattier part, because it's just gonna have more flavor. So when you're shopping, ask the butcher, can I get the thicker chunk with a little bit of fat on it? Because that's going to add flavor. And there's very little going on with pho in terms of you're boiling. It's a boiling thing. That's why in the book I'm if you can boil water, you can make pho, because that's about as technical as it gets. But there are certain things about the ingredients, you want to choose your ingredients wisely. Buy the best bones and the best brisket, meats and noodles and stuff that you can afford. And then your pho will taste even better. And then, so that's, going on. So your broth is taken care of. It's strained. And when you're making your broth, the only salty element that you have going on is salt. You're going to season the broth at the end with fish sauce or soy sauce, or I use rag liquid aminos, which is a really umami intense ingredient. And you do that at the end because you want that umami burst to happen at the end, that expression of I'm savory to happen then. If I used to put it in the broth when I was simmering everything, and I got some flack for it. So that was like, I did that like 10 years ago, and then when I was researching pho in Hanoi for a magazine article, for a Saveur magazine article back in 2010, there were these two chefs who were in their 60s, and they said, "Sister, we have your cookbook." And I was like, oh, great. That's not a good beginning, right? And they were talking about Into the Vietnamese Kitchen. They said, you know that pho recipe of yours? Why do you put your fish sauce at the beginning and not the end? And I was like, because that's how I like it. And I like how it flavors the meats. They go, no, put it at the end. You're going to get the floral qualities of fish sauce that way. So I went home and I was like talking to my mom. She goes, oh yeah, I've been wondering for years why you do that. So then I tried it out, and you get that expression of savoriness, and you get the role of those umami ingredients as a burst rather than as a layer. Because pho, otherwise, when you taste the broth, you're going, it needs a little something. But then once that you finish it, it's like a finishing salt function, okay? So think of it that way. And so you're going to, season your broth. Always season your broth a little bit saltier than what you're comfortable with, because the rest of the ingredients are not that salty. We're talking about like noodles, okay, that have just been, these are fresh noodles that Google uses. When you're using dry noodles, like the ones in the box, or these up here, sorry, you didn't know sitting there was going to be so problematic today, but I do not have Wilt Chamberlain arms. So, he's a basketball player from a very long time ago. So noodles come in different widths, okay? So small, medium, large. Like clothing sizes, there is no standard. So you just have to look. So think of it as linguine is small. Fettuccine is medium, or what you would use for pad thai. Pappardelle is large. For pho soup, and you would want to use like small or medium. The medium width noodles give you a little bit more of a mouthfeel to them, and some people really like that. In Vietnam, the difference between northern and southern pho is oftentimes the width of the noodles as well as the flavor of the broth. So they're wider in the north, and the broth is salty sweet. In the south, the noodles are narrower, and the flavor is sweet salty. That's part of the regional pho fight that goes on in Vietnam. So these are brands that I really like, and I pick these up at Asian markets. So we're talking about like Ranch 99, Lion, Marina. If you're traveling to other parts of the country, you can also pick, like H Mart, which is a really well-known chain. So anytime that you have, sometimes there's a little bit of scuzz left over in your broth. This little guy, which is an Asian scum skimmer or soup skimmer, is great for, it's very, very silky. And before I get this dirty, I'm just going to pass it around so that you get to feel it. It is very smooth, and it gets that scum right off. And it is just a fabulous tool to get. You can order those online. I believe those are called soup skimmers. But like my friends and I were like, get the scum skimmer. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful tool for removing impurities from broth. So you've got your noodles, and if you're using dry noodles, what you need to do is to soak them first. You rehydrate them in hot tap water. So let them sit in there until they're opaque and soft. And then the beauty of doing that is that once they're rehydrated, you can keep them, and drained, you can keep them in your fridge for 5 days. Hello, pho anytime, right? Some people boil their noodles before they plate them up and make their bowls. The problem with that is that you can't have leftovers because cooked rice noodles, they break under refrigeration. So if you soak them, then you're good to go for like 5 days whenever you want pho. The other things that you can prep, so you've got your protein set up. So you've got your meats ready, you've got your thank you. If you're a vegetarian, then we have tofu. And you can go ahead and you can slice everything up. You've got the onion. This is very, very thinly sliced red onion. You can use yellow onion if you'd like. You've got cilantro. And if you prep your cilantro ahead of time, you can, wash it, spin it dry, chop it up. You can keep it like in the fridge for like a day in advance, Green onions. Use the green part with the solid white part. Some people traditionally they would add this to the simmering pho broth for a little special treat. It turns kind of leek-like. So you could like drop that into your pho broth as you are getting things ready. The reason why you don't want to use that stuff raw, unless you've got these slender, slender spring onions, like we're talking the size of a wooden pencil slender, is that it's very harsh, so not good for a date night. Date night pho, not good. So you want to use just the green part and just very thinly slice it. And you can do this prep for the garnish, like I said, like a day or so in advance, or just while you're gathering everything. Phos are great, like team project. You've got friends, you have family over, set up a pho assembly line, get them all to put their own bowls together, and you just taste the broth and ladle it over, and they can like choose their proteins. And then you've got your tofu or chicken or the thing when you're working with the toppings for pho, for the protein elements, they need to be thin enough so that they can be warmed up by the hot broth very quickly. The other thing too is that you need it to be chopstickable. You can pick it up with a chopstick. So I would not say put a chunk like this into my bowl of pho. No, right? Clearly for the fact that how can I eat this with my chopsticks? Well, you don't have to eat pho with your chopsticks. You use a fork if you like with a spoon. But the thing is that it's just unpleasant. And the hot broth is what's going to warm things up. And it's not going to warm up a block of tofu like this. It will, however, warm up pieces of tofu that are thinly sliced. If you have a piece of tofu, let's say that's more like this size, or even like this, I'm going to show you a little very simple trick, which is if you're slicing at an angle, like so, you're getting these beautiful pieces that are thin. It's almost like cutting a piece of steak. But if you just angle it, similarly, like you can cut anything this way, but it's beautiful for tofu because then you're going to expose like more surface area to the heat. I do this when I'm making banh mi sandwiches. I would never put an entire piece of tofu like this in a banh mi. For the same reason, like, you slice up your meat for like a deli sandwich. Slice it thinly, and it'll lay flat in your bread, just like it'll lay flat on your noodles. All right. So you basically have two pots going, one for water and one for broth, and you bring them up to a boil. Meanwhile, with your noodles, I like to portion my noodles out first into each bowls. These are tasting bowls, so at home you can make them as large as you want. And then I finish tasting my broth one last time. And be careful with broth that's boiling. You put salt in. When a pot is boiling, it will overflow. And you have to clean it up. I have cleaned that up many, many times on my stove. If you've got an induction, no problem. You're just wiping the thing clean. But think about that. All right. So this is the other kind of tool that I love. This is a noodle dunker. Scum skimmer, noodle dunker. Well, I mean, it's like, so you'll see like noodle soup strainer, or noodle strainer. And the thing with this is that you can, I'll just show you, dunk this in your noodles in your pot like this. It's like, you can use this little guy for pastas, to blanch vegetables, whatever you want, because it's never going to touch. You can pull it out very, very quickly into small portions. And once that I dump it into my bowl, I shake my bowl to distribute the noodles. And you're dunking. How long do you dunk for? It depends on your noodle. These fresh noodles take very, very little time. With the drier ones, like if I were using the wider ones, I would dunk them a little bit longer. And also it depends. Do you like your noodles soft or do you like them a little bit chewy? I beg your pardon? Once that they are, here, I'm just going to pass that along. Once that they have softened like this in the strainer, you can also use some chopsticks and you can just like poke at it and see. Yeah. And then you're going to add your toppings. So you arrange your elements for your bowl flat, like I'm doing like so. Then you've got your onion, then you've got your cilantro, your green onion. So you've got this going. If you like black pepper, this is the time to like throw some on there. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, you've got your garnish plate going. And so we've got various different herbs. And Thai basil is not the only Vietnamese herb for pho. In fact, purists will say that this is a foreign vegetable because they're like, that's like for Thai food, just like sriracha's for Thai food. What's it doing in my pho? Those are our diehards. This adds a wonderful, wonderful fragrance to pho. However, you will go very, very far with regular mint. It's refreshing, it grows like a weed, my friends, and you can grow it in a pot very easily and grows year-round in many, many places. You keep it indoors. So mint adds a wonderful, refreshing quality. So when you have, when you're considering that garnish plate, Thai basil, mint, chilies, lime, sriracha, hoisin sauce, whatever you want. In terms of the chilies, Fresnos are wonderful, as well as serranos. Sometimes jalapenos taste like bell peppers. I know one little Vietnamese lady, she brings her own chilies with her to like Vietnamese restaurant because she just doesn't like the jalapeno. So, Fresnos are just wonderful. Got a moderate heat. Thai chilies. If you've got a really tiny Thai chili, like this, cut it on the bias. Bias just means diagonal. Or you can also cut, if you want to, in halvesies like this. The reason why you don't want to cut really, really tiny, tiny pieces is that once you put this into your bowl, it is very, very difficult to retrieve. You will lose it, and you may be sorry. So have all those things on a plate. If you're into bean sprouts, have those too. You can blanch your bean sprouts ahead of time using this tool in your pot of water before you do your noodles, because your noodles will cloud up the broth, and you don't want your bean sprouts to get a noodle starch bath. So take all of that into consideration. So the last thing you would do, then you've got your garnishes sitting out there, your herbs, your chili sauces and stuff. You don't have to have all these things. There is no right or wrong reason or wrong way to eat pho, okay? And in fact, when I grew up, there was no hoisin sauce or sriracha, because it was like my parents were they're hardcore. And so all I got was like mint picked from the yard. And so, there are many different ways. And there's actually a recipe in the book and on the recipe cards around that is for a chili sauce that's modeled on something sold only in Vietnam these days. And it's a really great, fun little sauce to make. So the last thing you want to do when the bowl's being assembled is step up to your boiling pot of broth and then ladle it over. And when you ladle in a circular path. Why circular? Because then it will warm everything up. All the toppings will then be warmed if you're doing a circular motion. It's a little bit, and use a ladle that is appropriate for the size of your bowls and stuff. And then you're through, and you run to the table and eat. And when you're eating pho, I like to wiggle my noodles up because they get very compacted at the bottom. So that's what we're going to do today for you here at the Google kitchen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. While we're waiting for tasty treats, does anybody have questions? Do you toast your spices was the question?
I used to be a spice toaster. And so the idea there is that you're helping the oils, the aromatics, to release their potency. Well, if you're going to be simmering that broth for 4 to 5 hours or using a pressure cooker, if you're simmering it for 4 to 5 hours, I do not toast them, because they're going to be, it's like a long steep in that hot water. In the pressure cooker, or when I make like a quick broth using canned stock, I do toast it, just because I'm like working faster, so I want to really bring up those flavors, and so I'm going to give it that little bit of heat.
Is it okay to boil your finished broth?
Yes, it is not okay to boil your simmering broth. Reason being is that if you're boiling let's say I've got my beef bones and my chicken bones in the pot, and it's like going really, really harsh. What happens is you're going to be blending all of those impurities in with the broth, and that's where you get the cloudiness. You're getting rid of a lot of the cloudiness through that parboiling business that I discussed at the front end, and also with straining through the fabric. And that will get you super, super crystal clear broth, I guarantee you. But that boiling will suspend stuff in there if you're not clear. You could totally boil that because you've strained it. All the impurities are gone. It's okay. I know, it's confusing. Yes?
Is there any way to decloud cloudy broth?
Really?
Olivia says milk. The milk will bond
Egg
with the
whites,
cloudiness and make it float, and then what you strain it. Oh, Food Lab, sure.
Yeah.
Kenji,
sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. And for example, we actually today you can try straining it again through like a coffee filter. You can try egg whites, but you know what? It's not gonna it's a look thing more than anything. If it's like super,
you should just eat it.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
You know what? If it's like dishwater, sometimes I'm gonna tell you this. I go to like some of these pho shops, even my favorite pho shops, and sometimes at the end of service, when they're maybe at the bottom of the pot, the broth is cloudy. So it's not, and sometimes too, when you stir up your noodles, there's starches in the noodles will make the broth a little cloudy. So that cloudiness is not necessarily like a bad thing. But sometimes when you're finished broth, if it's cloudy, you know what, you just move on and you make another pot. I mean, it's it's just food.
It's a great philosophy. We don't take ourselves too seriously here.
I don't either, yes.
What's your favorite pho spot in the Bay Area? Ooh.
I like this place down in South San Jose, so sort of in the hood, and it's called Pho Y, just like the letter Y. Number 1.
That's how you know it's going to be a legit place. There's a number
All
in the
they
name.
serve is pho. No like rice paper rolls, no rice plates. You just get chicken or beef, and the beef is much, much better. It's off of it's on East Capitol Expressway, close to the first intersection as you're going towards the mountains. And it's like a moderate sized bowl. And you go there on the weekends and around 11:30, and everybody is there, and it's multicultural, it's families. They're kind of rude. It's so
it's so legit,
so genuine and honest in the experience.
Awesome. As everybody's getting pho, I want to give a big thanks to our staff here at Kitchen Sink. They take such good care of us. Any last questions? There'll be book signing after we get a chance to eat. How did you prepare that tofu?
Well, the way that I prepare tofu in the book is very simple. So I get a block of extra firm tofu. So that's the tofu that is sold in a tub with water, with a moat of water around it. And so I'll slice the tofu. The tofu that Google gets is like restaurant size, so it's a little bit different than what we see. But I get the tofu and I'll cut it into pieces about this size, and then I put it into a nonstick skillet with a little bit of soy sauce. In the book, the recipe is called pan-seared tofu, and it's one of my favorite ways of making like a grab-and-go tofu. So you put your tofu in there. No need to do that draining business, alrighty? Because in the skillet, it will release its liquid. Add soy sauce, turn the tofu a few times, and then you turn on your heat to around medium or so. The tofu then will release its natural liquid. So it's draining right there for you. It's then going to get coated and pick up some flavor from the soy sauce. And then once that the tofu looks kind of dryish, add a little bit of oil, and then you're going to let that outer coating kind of sear and fry a little bit. And then once that's done, and total cooking time is like 10 minutes, you're home. And then you just like cool it. And I keep that in the fridge, and it lasts for days. And I use it for pho, I use it for fried rice. I'll put it in sandwiches. I sometimes just eat it when I'm feeling hangry. So, it's like one of my favorite tofu convenience foods.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.